This is BBC News, the headlines. Almost 500,000 Sudanese have fled their homes since fighting erupted more than 2 weeks ago. 100,000 have gone to neighbouring countries. A prominent Palestinian prisoner, Kader Adnan, has died in an Israeli jail after nearly 3 months on hunger strike. And the Hollywood ending, Wrexham fans prepare to celebrate their team winning the National League and returning to the English Football League. Welcome back. Hamas and Islamic Jihad say they fired more than 20 rockets from Gaza into Israel. It comes after the death of a prominent Palestinian prisoner on the 87th day of a hunger strike in Israeli custody. Israeli authorities said Kader Adnan, who was a member of Islamic Jihad, had refused medical treatment and was found unconscious in his cell. The Prime Minister of the Palestinian Authority has accused Israel of a deliberate assassination. Adnan's widow said no blood should be shed because of his death. Dr. Lina Kassem Hassan visited Kader Adnan on the 23rd of April as a volunteer doctor. She joins me now live from Haifa. Thank you so much, Doctor, for joining us here on the programme. You were one of the last people to see him. Just tell me what he looked like. What was his condition?
Okay, almost 1 week ago, I examined Mr. Kader Adnan in the medical center of the Israeli prison, the Marash in the Ramla prison. I found a young man who is terminally ill. Actually, he was in a very deteriorated medical condition. He was very fatigued and underweight. He was exhausted. He could barely speak to me, and he couldn't walk. Or he actually 80 days of refusing any food supplements, any vitamins, minerals, or sugar. He only drank tap water. And I explained to him his bad medical condition. He was aware of that, but he was very consistent with his strike until getting his freedom back.
And you actually wanted him moved to a civilian hospital.
Yeah, after he was examined, I wrote a report, a medical report, and we in Physicians for Human Rights demanded that he should be transferred immediately to a civil hospital in order to be observed 24 hours. Because when I talked to him, he said that he expects from the medical staff to make an immediate intervention in a case that he gets unconscious in order to save his life. He said that he didn't want to die, but he refused to cooperate with the medical staff. That's not a reason that he should not be observed 24 hours in order to save his life in a case if something happens.
Yeah, I mean, because the Israeli authorities have said that he refused any medical assessments or treatments. What do you think at that point they could have done then?
Yeah, that's right. But if he was held in a hospital, his life could have been saved, and this death would have been prevented. Actually, because he was held in the prison, and this is a clinic of the prison. Actually, it doesn't have the instruments, neither staff that can save his life in case of emergency, and that's what happened. Actually, he lost his conscience, and after the only observation available in the prison is a prisoner that gets in his room every half an hour. That's the only observation available, and no medical assistance is available. Immediate medical assistance. He should be held in observation 24 hours in a hospital.
So are you saying that he should have been forcefully removed from there given his deteriorating situation?
No, he demanded to be transferred to a hospital, to a civil hospital, because he wanted to live. He didn't want to die. He said that if he gets unconscious, he expects that the medical staff will give him medical care immediately, and that's his right. We as physicians actually, I'm very angry about this because I blame the medical system in Israel for his death. I blame the Israeli government. I blame also the Israeli prison services.
The prison services have said that hospitalization was not an option because he declined even a preliminary inspection.
That's right, but it's not a reason not to admit him for observation in the hospital just for such a case that happened in the prison. It's not the contrary one to the other, actually. There's no problem to transfer him and to admit him there. We and the Red Cross and many other organization demanded that because we saw how his condition is getting worse day by day, and this death was expected, and it's not surprising at all. You know, all the international information about hunger strikes talks about death after the day 50, and he was already on 80 days of complete strike. It's not partial; it was complete, and this is his fifth strike. So we start from a point which is medically bad because his medical status was worse than the previous strikes that he had.
He conducted, as you say, he's had previous strikes, hunger strikes that he had conducted. Can you tell us if there are others in similar situations to him?
I don't know about strikers right now, but every few months we have a hunger striker that because of the policy of administrative detention that the Israeli authorities do for the Palestinian people all the time. You know, we have like 750 administrative detainees right now in the Israeli prisons. This is a huge number. And this is in contrary to all the international agreements and the international law. You know, this is an instrument that should be used only in emergent cases. And you know what? Administrative detention is actually to get somebody to prison without being in court or having a legal process.
Okay. And Dr. Lina Kassem Hassan, we're really grateful that you've joined us here on the program. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good evening.
Now, Lucy Letby, the British nurse accused of murdering 7 babies and trying to kill 10 others, has been giving evidence for the first time in her trial. She cried in the witness box and told the jury she only wanted to help and care for the babies she was looking after. "My job was my life," she insisted, and she said she was traumatised when she was arrested. She denies all the charges against her. Our correspondent Judith Moritz was in court and sent us this report.
In courtroom number 7, all eyes were on Lucy Letby. Charged with murdering and attacking babies, she said herself, "You can't be accused of anything worse." Now the time has come to hear directly from her. Leading her defence, Ben Myers KC spent the day putting questions to the woman he calls Miss Letby. He'll take several days. She'll be asked about all 17 babies she's alleged to have harmed or killed. Lucy Letby's parents have been at court throughout the trial and sat in the public gallery as their daughter began her stint in the witness box. Ben Myers began by asking the question at the heart of the entire case. "Did you ever want to hurt any baby?" he asked. "No," said Lucy Letby, "that's completely against what being a nurse is. I only wanted to help and to care for them." There was complete silence in court as Lucy Letby spoke clearly, looking directly at the jury, and sitting just yards away from the parents of some of the babies she's accused of attacking or murdering. The nurse is accused of killing 7 babies at the Countess of Chester neonatal unit between June 2015 and June 2016 and of attempting to murder a further 10. She denies all the charges. She was taken off duty when doctors at the hospital raised their suspicions. But it was another 2 years before she was arrested and her house was searched. Ben Myers KC asked the nurse how she felt when she realised what she was being accused of. The nurse started to cry in the witness box and said, "There were times when I didn't want to live. My job was my life. My whole world stopped." Ben Myers asked, "How hard is it to cope with what you're being accused of?" Lucy Letby answered, "Everything has changed. Everything about me. My hope for the future has changed." The prosecution has previously shown the jury several handwritten notes explaining that they were found by the police when they searched Lucy Letby's house after her arrest. On one of them, she'd written, "I don't know if I killed them. Maybe I did." On another, her barrister picked out some phrases to show to the court. And Myers said, "It says I'm evil, I did this. Why did you write that?" Lucy Letby replied, "I felt at the time that if I'd done something wrong, I must be such an evil, awful person. I'd somehow been incompetent and had done something wrong, which had affected those babies." Lucy Letby told the court it was noticeably busier at the Countess of Chester neonatal unit during the year she's accused of harming babies. She said the unit seemed to have more babies with complex needs and no increased staffing to cope with it. She was asked why she'd searched for the parents of babies on Facebook. She answered that it was out of curiosity and they were on her mind. The nurse will continue giving her evidence later this week. Judith Moritz, BBC News, Manchester.
Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News.
German tenor Jonas Kaufmann has it all. The voice, the good looks, plus superb acting skills that have already made him an opera legend.
Each time he performs, people are happy, are more than happy. He's like a pop star, but he's very serious.
He doesn't just do German, he doesn't just do Italian, and it's such a beautiful, rich and voluptuous and expressive voice. I would describe him as an operatic legend in operatic history.
You're watching BBC News. To Wrexham in Wales now, where thousands of fans have lined the route of an open-top bus parade to celebrate the club's return to the Football League after 15 years. The players will be joined by the Hollywood stars Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney, who bought the club 2 years ago and have made a TV series about it. Well, joining me now live is Byrne Law, a football commentator and a long-time Wrexham FC fan. Thank you so much for joining us here on the programme. This is such an extraordinary story, a real fairy tale, really.
Well, some people dispute that description of fairy tale, but I think in a lot of fairy tales you find that somebody, it's a rags to riches saga, isn't it? Somebody's down at heel and then the handsome prince arrives and suddenly everything's better again. Well, our two handsome princes have come in the guise of Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney. And since they've arrived in North Wales, since they took over the football club, everything has been absolutely transformed. And the culmination of that, the first chapter at least, is these incredible scenes that we're seeing on the streets of Wrexham this evening, where tens of thousands have turned out to celebrate promotion out of the non-league. I mean, the very fact that you and I are talking about a club being promoted out of non-league into the Football League, the lowest level of the Football League, gives you some sort of sense of how this has caught the imagination as a story.
Yeah, I mean, I know, I've been hearing this phrase fairy tale, but I wanted to use it because I just want to give our sense. I mean, we've got a lot of international audiences watching around the world. Just sum up this story. How did this all happen? Because of course, this was a club that was really struggling. And it was the fans who were keeping it alive all these years, and they too were struggling until these two Hollywood stars stepped in.
Yeah, that's absolutely it. We got to the point. I've been a Wrexham fan since 1979 when I watched my first game. That was in the second tier level in the English game. So we've had better times, and then we fell all the way down through the divisions out of the league and into non-league. We had bad owners. The club nearly went bust a couple of times, and eventually the fans had to take control just to try and preserve the club, a club that first played its first game in 1864. But it was a struggle. It was a real struggle. 15 years in non-league. We couldn't get out of non-league. And we were at the point where things were looking very, very bleak in lockdown. And then suddenly, from nowhere, literally from nowhere, Rob and Ryan arrived. And from that point onwards, things have just changed completely. And this is a small town in North Wales that's had a lot of tough times. I remember I grew up there, high unemployment, a lot of people in poverty. But now the feel-good factor is absolutely palpable. You'll see it in the pictures of the open top bus tour this evening. The place
Yeah, we're looking at those images right now of just the fans, the thousands of people in the streets on top of that buses as well. The other thing is that these two are fully invested in this. It's not like they've just thrown money and walked away.
No, absolutely. And it's that level of commitment that they've shown that isn't just financial, it's an emotional investment as well. And they've displayed that. You saw that in the scenes around the promotion that Wrexham achieved 10 days ago by beating Boreham Wood. They're absolutely into this. They go quite regularly to matches. Remember, of course, they are based in America, and they're very busy guys as well. But there's as much of excitement around the fact that they have kind of bought into the community as there is about the fact that they bought the football club, because the whole town has been absolutely lifted by this in a way that you just couldn't believe unless you knew what it was like before.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like a script from a film, because I mean, TikTok's invested, they're going to the US to play, all of these things that just completely change their sort of fate.
Well, I mean, it happened a couple of years ago, the takeover. I've met Ryan and Rob. I go to Wrexham games whenever I can. Saw the last 6 games of this season. It's been fantastic, but I'm still literally finding it quite hard to believe. And I know lots of other fans, lifelong Wrexham fans, are in the same situation. We've gained a lot of new supporters. There are people from all over the world now coming to my scruffy little hometown of Wrexham to visit, tourists. It's absolutely amazing. The impact that these two guys, plus the documentary series Welcome to Wrexham, the impact it's had has been phenomenal.
What have they said? I mean, I've heard a few, snippets of interviews they've done, just how deeply emotional they get. But what have they been saying to you?
Well, the one point that they were at pains, 2 points actually, they were at pains to make when I was chatting with them. I went to watch a game with them as their guest, which was brilliant. But they were saying we're here for the long term. They were absolutely adamant about that. This is not a short-term concept. It's not a short-term project. They're invested for the long term, but they're also invested in the community as well as in the football club. They want to lift Wrexham up. They've fallen in love with the place. There's no doubt about that. And that's as much of the excitement, I think, around this whole project for all of us, is the fact that we see such great possibilities now, because they're tantalizingly suggesting things that they see could happen. Their latest interview, they suggest Premier League is where they would like to get the club in 5 years or in 20 years. So that means they see themselves being around for a long time. It's an unbelievable story. It really is. It
really is a really wonderful and unbelievable story. Bern, thank you so much for joining us here on the programme. And you can follow all the developments from that celebration on our website. We've got a live page, if we can show it to our audiences. It's just the usual place, bbc.co.uk, with all the celebrations as well as the developments. It's all there on the website, so catch up on it there. Now, Iran is using crime gangs and terror groups as hit squads on the streets of London. Iranian journalist Aliasgar Ramazanpour knows all too well about these threats. The Met Police have told him multiple times he was in immediate danger. Threats to Iranian journalists living and working in London is the subject matter of a new podcast series by Paul Caruana-Galizia. And Paul joins me now here. He's the host of Londongrad, Iran's hit squads. Paul, thank you so much. I'm such a fan of your work. I listened to the first series, which was all about Russian money in London, and now this is something else. But it also is about a country and a people who have deep roots in London and have done so for decades.
That's right. So that's really kind of you to say, first of all. I, in the first series, became very interested in this idea of London as a city that's very rich, very cosmopolitan and very free, but at the same time is a place where you see real violence. You see Russian assassinations, attempts at them. And the focus on Iran for this one came almost by accident. So I was speaking to a lawyer, a great lawyer actually, Keelan Gallagher, who acts for my family, but also for journalists at BBC Persian. And she told me that the threats her clients have been facing over the past year have escalated and really intensified. And I thought, to me, that sounded quite extraordinary. I thought these are people who moved to London precisely because their home country of Iran was so restrictive for their kind of work. Yet here they are, facing really serious threats. And it's not just BBC Persian, right? So Ali Asghar Ramazanpur, who you mentioned, is the executive editor of another TV station here in London, which was based in Chiswick, actually, until quite recently. And Ali Asghar, in the space of about 10 months, received 2 formal warnings from counter-terrorism police officers who told him...
Saying, basically, that there are threats against his life here in London.
Here in London, that's right. So the form of words they use is that there is a credible and imminent threat to your life. Now, they say very little, counter-terrorism police say very little about the nature of the threat, say whether it was a plan to shoot him, stab him, or whatever else. But they did tell him that the source of the threats was the Iranian government.
I mean, that in itself is so extraordinary. And then he was forced, and his staff were forced, to shut their offices here in London.
That's right.
In suburban sort of Chiswick.
That's right.
In West London. They were forced to close their doors.
It is just extraordinary. So the reporting for this story, in fact, moved quite quickly. So a day before I went to their office in Chiswick, I went to a counter-terrorism briefing at Scotland Yard, where Matt Jukes, who's the head of counter-terrorism policing, said that working with MI5, they had intercepted 5 such plots, 5 Iranian assassination and kidnap plots since November. The reason why he said since November is because in November, Ken McCallum, the Director General of MI5, said that since January 2022, they had intercepted 10. So by mid-February this year, the number had reached 15. So a day after that Scotland Yard briefing, I went to Chiswick, met Ali Asghar, many of his colleagues. At that point, their office was surrounded by 3-meter-high steel fences, guards. There were counter-terrorism police officers roaming around. And again, just a few days, 2 days actually after that, he received a call from his security team saying, listen, we just spoke to counter-terrorism police. They told us we can't protect you in that business park in Chiswick anymore. It's too difficult.
You've got to close your doors.
You've got to close your doors.
Have they left the country now?
They now broadcast from Washington, D.C., but many of the editorial staff are here in London, just not at Chiswick any longer. You
mentioned your family are represented by the same lawyer.
That's right.
Because, of course, this sort of story is very personal to you. Your mother, Daphne, was killed in Malta. She was an investigative journalist.
That's right. So in October 2017, my mother, Daphne, was murdered in a car bombing, actually not far from our family home at all. And I'm the youngest of 3 brothers, and from that point on, the 3 of us sort of went on a campaigning trip really around the world. And one of the stops we did was a press freedom gathering in London where this lawyer, Keelan Gallagher, was present. And after we spoke, she sort of rushed up to us and said, please let me help you. And she has been for the past six or so years.
So in many ways, the story of the threat against journalists, investigative journalists, working against states is very real. It's something that is part of your world and life.
It is very real. And the thing I found fascinating about the Iran story is this, that we found, of course, Iran has a very long history of trying to assassinate people overseas. Really, it started right after the 79 Islamic Revolution. But early on, Iran would target political dissidents, so people who used to work for the Shah, his former ministers, and so on, because, of course, it was a new republic and very fragile and very insecure. But now, of course, the threat has changed, and the threat comes now from journalists who, unable to work in Iran, have set up outside it and broadcast in Persian back home. And again, the situation they're in now is one where they are reporting on a an almost unprecedented time of unrest in Iran, right? The Masa Amini protests are really existential for the Islamic Republic. So to have this kind of very persistent, very free coverage of what's happening there is seen by the Iranian government as a very real threat.
Real threat, and it's a threat that BBC Persian faces against their family members and staff here as well. Paul, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much.
And your podcast series, London Grad, Iran's Hit Squads, came out today. And of course, they can still listen to the first series, which was all about Russian money laundering here in London as well. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. We'll be back in the next few minutes. Don't go anywhere. Lots more coming up.